This week in Canada, we said au revoir to the monarchy, told Trump to shove his tariffs, and watched Andrew Scheer try to reboot 2019 like it's a Netflix flop that no one asked for.
Meanwhile, Gen Z showed up to demand actual leadership, while Doug Ford tried to cancel Mexico and declare war on trees.
Yep, it's been that kind of week. Canada's economy is growing, Trump's tantrums are growing louder, and Poilievre, yep, still allergic to facts. This is the Sunday edition of Canada versus the Chaos, so buckle up, butter tarts.
And hey, if you love seeing Trump squirm, Alberta burn with denial, and Canadian democracy bite back, hit that like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm we're not bots, we're just paying attention.
The first question period since the election should have been a reset, but instead of showing humility, what did the Conservatives do? They showed their true colors yet again. They grabbed a chainsaw and demanded that we repeal C-69 and the environmental protections that hold big oil accountable.
This, while wildfires rage across Manitoba and Saskatchewan, some of the worst in recorded history. Thousands are being evacuated, homes lost, smoke choking the air from Winnipeg to Windsor.
And their big idea? Roll back climate policy and pave a path for big oil. Because the only thing that they want regulated is your outrage. Because this isn't about policy anymore, it's about power. And they'll burn the whole thing down literally and politically if it keeps donations rolling in.
Instead of holding the government to account, which is the opposition's job, they held up a mirror to everything Canadians voted against.
Division, culture war soundbites recycled from Fox News and dumped into Parliament Hill.
But here's the part they still don't get. Canada didn't just vote for something, we voted against this.
Yes, against rage, against spin, against politics as performance art.
And you know what? If the Conservatives don't figure that out fast, they won't just lose question period, they'll lose the next decade.
And where was Pierre Poilievre? Not in Parliament, no, because he lost his seat, remember?
But don't worry, Dave, he found a camera outside Parliament. Same talking points, different background. Meanwhile, the throne speech offered an olive branch. Calls for unity, bilingualism, First Nation reconciliation.
But did the Conservatives come up to meet the moment? Nope. Canada deserves better. And the planet deserves better too.
Which brings us to Doug Ford.
Doug Ford's back in Ontario swinging a wrecking ball through environmental protections like it's opening night at the Demolition Derby. His latest assault on environmental protections in Ontario is Bill 5. It guts oversight from conservation authorities, clears the way for more urban sprawl, and rewards developers again. Bill 5 isn't just a bad law. It's a blueprint for environmental destruction disguised as a red tape reduction.
It guts the authority of conservation agencies. It fast-tracks development on sensitive lands, and it strips away the very tools communities have to say, hey, this might poison our water, or hey, this might flood our town.
And who's most at risk? The same people who always are. Rural communities, wetlands, low-income neighborhoods, and Indigenous land defenders.
This bill makes it easier for developers to pave over watersheds without consulting First Nations, without studying environmental impacts, and without caring what's downstream.
It's the same story every time with this guy. Ford talks about cutting red tape, but what he's actually cutting is community input, Indigenous sovereignty, and environmental protection.
The land doesn't vote, but it does flood, it burns, and it collapses. And we all pay the price later while his donors and corporate buddies cash in now.
The Chiefs of Ontario had demanded that the bill be scrapped entirely, emphasizing that their communities are not against development, but insist on being active partners in decisions affecting their land.
And in response to the backlash, the Ford government proposed amendments to include provisions for Indigenous consultation. However, critics argue that these changes are insufficient and lack clarity on how consultation will be conducted and how Indigenous consent will be obtained. Environmental groups warn that Bill 5 could lead to the degradation of critical habitats and endangered species, as it replaces the robust Endangered Species Act with a weaker Species Conservation Act, reducing protections for at-risk wildlife.
In essence, while Premier Ford claims to uphold Indigenous rights and environmental stewardship, the provisions of Bill 5 suggest otherwise. The legislation appears to prioritize economic development over the rights of Indigenous communities and the health of Ontario's ecosystems. Let's talk about the man who can't handle a meme without throwing a global tantrum.
Yep, we're heading straight into the chicken coop because this week the taco trade came back to bite Trump hard. Taco, Trump always chickens out.
Funny name, serious money. Because it wasn't just a joke, it actually became a trading strategy. It goes like this. He makes a big threat, markets panic, and then nothing.
It became a pattern, and a profitable one at that.
The grifter-in-chief throws a tantrum, the market panics, his buddies short the right stocks, and suddenly the chicken's laying golden eggs.
Wall Street may be calling it chicken, but let's be real, this isn't cowardice, it's a grift. Trump's not afraid of conflict, he's just addicted to chaos that pays.
So, in reality, the taco trade was never about diplomacy. It was a scam with a side of ketchup.
But then the internet caught on. The memes came flying. Chicken of the deal, commander in beak, taco in chief.
But the real danger? Trump always chickens out until the joke hits too close to home.
So now, to save face, he's willing to tank trade, raise costs, and punish allies, just so he's not the butt of another chicken meme. This isn't about steel, it's about ego, and he's not raising tariffs because it makes sense. He's doing it because he was made fun of.
And now he can't back down, because if he does, he becomes the punchline all over again.
So instead of chickening out like he always does, he's doubling down. 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum.
It's not a trade war, it's a meme war with economic casualties.
The taco trade might have made him a punchline, but Trump's not backing down, and now we're all going to pay the price.
From tariff threats to missile ultimatums to 51st state rhetoric, it doesn't end there. This week, Donald Trump also made an offer no one in their right mind would accept. Join the United States as the 51st state, and the missile protection is free. Stay sovereign? Well, that'll be $61 billion.
Canadian ambassador to the UN, Bob Ray, called it what it is, a protection racket straight from the Godfather playbook with fewer vowels and way more spray tan.
Trump's pitch boils down to, nice country you've got there. Be ashamed if something happened to it unless you join the family. And Mark Carney, he didn't even flinch, didn't waver, didn't offer him a loonie. In fact, Mark Carney's office responded to Trump's $61 billion Golden Dome ultimatum like this. The Prime Minister has been clear at every opportunity, including in his conversations with President Trump, that Canada is an independent, sovereign nation and will remain one. And yeah, the Golden Dome is being discussed, but as part of NORAD upgrades and a joint defense strategy, not some loyalty test from a delusional hotel lobby warlord.
So while Trump threatens to put a price tag on peace, Canada's doing what it always does. We're standing tall, speaking calmly, and calling out the BS without blinking. And speaking of standing tall, Canada rolled out the red carpet for a royal.
This week, King Charles made history, delivering the first throne speech by a reigning monarch since 1977.
And it couldn't have come at a more important moment. While Trump is threatening Canada's sovereignty and trying to bully us into becoming the 51st state, this symbolism mattered.
Charles didn't just show up for the ceremony, he delivered a calm, confident message about unity, bilingualism, First Nations, and Canada's independence on the world stage.
And then, right on cue, Quebec passed a motion to cut symbolic ties with the Crown.
Great timing, right?
To be clear, this motion won't change the Constitution, and it's not binding, but symbolically it sends the wrong message at the worst possible time.
I couldn't believe it. While the rest of the country was standing together, showing we have allies, a head of state, and the stability Trump can only dream of, Quebec chose that moment to stir the pot.
And look, there's a time to have a serious conversation about the monarchy's future in Canada. But when you're facing down economic sabotage, foreign interference, and threats of annexation, maybe don't light the house on fire from the inside. Just quite yet.
Charles, he didn't bring drama, he brought dignity. And sometimes that's exactly what a country under pressure needs.
Because while some politicians are still performing for the cameras, the new generation is showing up for the future.
They're not interested in rage, they're interested in results. And if Parliament won't deliver, well, Gen Z is not waiting around.
Yep. While Parliament was busy recycling outrage, hundreds of young Canadians were in Ottawa demanding real action on climate, housing, and democracy.
Gen Z isn't here for partisan theater. They're here to clean up a mess that the last few generations of politicians left behind.
They showed up with handmade signs, real policy ideas, and a message. Just stop fighting each other and start fixing things.
They want electoral reform. They want climate policy that doesn't bow to oil executives. And they're not afraid to call out anyone, left or right, who's faking it.
They've grown up watching politicians talk in circles while the planet burns and rent triples. They're done with this performative rage and they want results, and so do we.
Yeah, and while some media try to dismiss it as a youth protest, let's be honest. This generation is more informed, more diverse, and more collaborative than anyone before it. They're organizing, and maybe they should be running trade talks because the grown-ups, they're too busy picking fights with our closest allies.
Which brings us to Doug Ford. This week he floated the idea that Mexico should be kicked out of the USMCA.
And why? Because some Chinese goods are being rerouted through Mexico, relabeled Made in Mexico, and slipping into North America tariff-free.
To be fair, that's a real issue and it's hurting Canadian workers. But instead of pushing for trade enforcement, Ford jumps right into kick him out. He wants a US-Canada trade pact only. He's even branding it USCA. It sounds bold, right?
Except, it's a terrible idea. Calling for a separate US-Canada deal would blow up the trilateral trade bloc that supports over $1.5 trillion in annual trade.
It would destabilize supply chains, especially in auto and agriculture. These are sectors that rely on cross-border cooperation between all three countries.
And let's be honest, Trump would love it. The US-Canada only deal? That's easier for him to bully, and it plays perfectly into his divide and conquer strategy.
But luckily, Mark Carney spoke to Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, and they assigned senior officials to deepen the partnership and prep for the next CUSMA review together.
Carney also told CBC this week that Canada won't rush into negotiating the agreement until the US backs off these bogus tariffs. Translation, we're not walking into a trade war blind, buddy. Finally, some good news from Alberta.
A new poll shows that 67% of Albertans do not support separation. Woo! And most of them, they proudly identify as Canadian.
Let's just pause there. After months of rhetoric and Wexit noise, the silent majority spoke up, and they said, we're staying.
Because deep down, even in oil country, people know the truth. You don't fix problems by quitting the team. You fix them by fighting for better together.
Sure, there's frustration. Over healthcare, over transfer payments, over being heard. But separation? That's not a solution.
This poll shows that Albertans aren't buying the fantasy anymore. They're tired of being used as a pawn in some half-baked Mar-a-Lago power play.
And they're saying that while their province is literally on fire. Wildfires are raging across parts of Alberta, just like in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And who's showing up to help? Canada.
Canadian forces, interprovincial support, national coordination.
If Alberta really went it alone, who's stepping in when the smoke rolls in? When homes are lost? When lives are at risk?
The other 30% in that poll may still believe in the breakup fantasy, but wildfires don't care about your political identity, and neither does the help.
Because being Canadian means having each other's backs, even when the rhetoric says separate and reality says you can't.
Look, we get it. The frustration is real, but separation doesn't build hospitals, it doesn't stop fires, and it sure doesn't come with its own water bombers. We have a friend that's one of those water bomber pilots, and he's flying out west right now as we speak.
Those polls show what most Albertans already know. You don't walk out when things get tough. You dig in. You demand better. You fight for it with the rest of us.
Because unity isn't weakness, it's survival. And Alberta, we see you, we've got you, we're united.
Being Canadian doesn't mean being perfect. It means not giving up on each other, even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when Trump is trying to annex you for aluminum and attention.
From coast to coast to coast, we are stronger when we stand together.
We've got a prime minister who's fighting for our sovereignty, a generation that's rising to lead, and provinces pushing through flames, side by side.
So don't buy the division, don't fall for the noise, and don't underestimate the power of a country that still believes in each other. And if you want to wear your pride, check out our Canada First merch store. All shirts and hoodies are printed right here in Canada by a Canadian-owned company. No offshore printing, no fake nationalism, just the real thing.
If you like this video, share it. Help us cut through the chaos and keep the facts loud and clear. Because when we say Canada's not for sale, we mean it.
We'll be back next Sunday with more facts, more fun, and maybe a few more acronyms.
Until then, stay sharp, stay kind, and stay Canadian.